They passed out of the circle and walked up the hill toward Ginelli's car, and the evening shadows swallowed them. They walked to the Buick. Ginelli opened the driver's side door while the girl stood there. He leaned in, taking the .38 out of the shoulder holster with one hand and pushing the wire lid holder off the ball jar with the other. "Here we are," Ginelli said, and turned back to her with the gun in one hand and the glass ball jar in the other. "You can start to scream," Ginelli said, "but I guarantee it will be the last sound you ever hear yourself make, Gina." For a moment, he thought she would do it anyway, and then she let the breath out in a long sigh. "You're working for that pig," she said. "Han satt the sigba—" "Talk English, hoa," he said almost casually, and she recoiled as if slapped. "You don't call me a whore," she whispered. "You call my friend William a pig. I call you a hoa. Your mother a hoa. Your father an asshole-licking toilet hound," Ginelli said. He saw her lips draw back from her teeth in a snarl. "He was getting a jerk-off job from his woman, and he ran my grandmother down in the street. And then they whitewash him off. But we got him fixed, and you will be next, you friend of pigs. It don't matter what." Ginelli pushed the glass cap off the top of the wide-mouthed jar with his thumb. Her eyes went to the jar for the first time. "Acid, hoa," he said, and threw it in her face. "See how many people you shoot with that slingshot of yours when you're blind." She clapped her hands over her eyes, too late. She fell to the ground. Ginelli put a foot on her neck. "You scream, and I'll kill you. You and the first 3 of your friends to make it up here." He took the foot away. "It was Pepsi-Cola." She got to her knees, staring at him through her spread fingers. An instant later, he knew she was going to go for his balls. As she sprang at him, he sidestepped and kicked her in the side. The back of her head struck the driver's door with a crunch, and she fell in a heap, blood flowing down one cheek. Ginelli bent toward her, and she was at him, hissing. One hand tore across his forehead, opening a long cut there. The other ripped through the arm of his turtleneck and drew more blood. Ginelli snarled and pushed her back down. He jammed the pistol against her nose. "Come on. You want to go for it? You want to? Go for it, hoa. Go on. You spoiled my face. I'd love for you to go for it." She lay still, staring at him with eyes now as dark as death. "You'll do it," he said. "If it was just you, you'd come at me again. But it would just about kill him, wouldn't it? The old man." She said nothing, but a dim light seemed to flicker momentarily across the darkness of those eyes. "Well, you think what it would do to him if there really had been acid I threw in your face. Think what it would do to him. I could do it, hoa. I could do it, then go back home and eat a good dinner. You look into my face, and you are going to know that I could." Now at last he saw confusion and a dawning of something that could have been fear, but not for herself. "He cursed you," he said. "I was the curse." "That pig," she whispered, and wiped blood from her face. "He tells me not to hurt anyone," Ginelli went on, as if she had not spoken. "I haven't. But that ends tonight. You tell your grandfather to take it off. You tell him it's the last time I ask. Here, take this." He pressed a scrap of paper into her hand. "You're going to call this number by midnight tonight and tell me what the old man says." "He'll never take it off." "Well, maybe he won't," he said. "But that's not your business. You just play square with him, let him make up his own mind what he's going to do, and make sure that you explain to him that if he says no, that's when the boogie-woogie really starts. You go first, then anybody else I can get my hands on. You tell him that. Now get up." Without taking his eyes off her, Ginelli got into the car and started the engine. As he pulled away, she screamed, "Your friend is a pig and he'll die thin." "But I don't think you will," Ginelli said to Billy. "What do you mean?" Ginelli looked at his watch. It was after 3 o'clock. "I'll tell you in the car," he said. "You've got an appointment at 7 o'clock. "With him?" "That's right. Let's go." They took the Nova. Ginelli stopped around 4 to pick up a huge basket of steamer clams. They parked at a roadside rest area and divided them, along with a 6-pack of beer. While they ate, Ginelli finished his story. It didn't take long. "I was back in the John Tree room by 11 o'clock last night," he said. "Once I was in the room, I called New York and I sent a fellow out to the telephone I gave the girl the number for. I told him to take a tape deck and a steno plug with him. I didn't want to have to rely on hearsay, William, if you can dig that. I told him to call me back with the tape as soon as she hung up." The call had come at 12:15. Closing his eyes and pressing the fingers of his left hand against his forehead, Gianelli was able to give Billy an almost exact recitation of how the playback had gone. Gianelli's man. "Hello? Gina Lemke. Do you work for the man I saw tonight?" Gianelli's man. "Yes, you could say that." Gina. "Tell him my great-grandfather says he will take it off. He says there can be no more hurting and no more fear for his people. He will take it off. But he needs to meet with Halleck. He can't take it off unless he does. At 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, my great-grandfather will be in Bangor. There is a park between two streets, Union and Hammond. He will be there. He will be alone." "She hung up," Gianelli said. "Christ Jesus," Billy muttered. "The old man caved in." "It looks that way," Gianelli conceded. "We'll find out for sure when we get there. Are you ready?" Billy looked at him and nodded. He'd been ready for a long time. "We're here," Gianelli said simply, and Billy felt a finger touch his backbone and then slide coldly down it. "Park's right down at the foot of this hill, 1/4 of a mile. Pick a bench in the shade and wait." "Where will you be?" "I'll be around," Gianelli said, and smiled. "Thank you," Billy said, and was not sure just how or how much he meant that. He did feel gratitude to Gianelli, but it was a strange, difficult emotion, like the hate he now bore for Houston and for his wife. "Por nada," Gianelli said, and shrugged. He leaned across the seat, hugged Billy, and kissed him firmly on both cheeks. "Be tough with the old bastard, William." "I will," Billy said, smiling, and got out of the car. The park was wide and cool and green and deep. Far across the way, a softball game was going on, the boys against the girls, it looked like. In between, people walked, flew kites, threw frisbees. The bench was quite a distance apart from the others, and Billy attracted no undue attention so far as he could tell. From a distance, he could have been a very thin old man taking in a little afternoon air. He sat, and an almost fantastical sense of despair overtook him. Things had gone too far, and nothing could be taken back. Not even Gianelli, with his psychotic energy, could change what had happened. He could only make things worse. He dozed, and when he awoke, there was Tadeusz Lemke sitting beside him. "Wake up, white man from town," he said. "I'm awake," Billy said thickly. "You sure?" Lemke asked, with some interest. "Yes." The old man wore a grey serge suit, double-breasted. A gold hoop sparkled from one of his earlobes. The rot Billy saw had spread. Dark lines now radiated out from the ruins of his nose and across most of his runneled left cheek. "Cancer," Lemke said. His bright black eyes, the eyes of a bird for sure, never left Billy's face. "You like that? It make you happy?" "No," Billy said. "Don't lie," Lemke said. "There is no need." "None of it makes me happy," he said. "I'm sick about it all, believe me." "I don't believe nothing no white man from town ever told me," Lemke said. "But you're sick, oh yeah. You're dying from being thin, so I brought you something. It's going to fatten you up, make you better." His lips drew back from the black stumps of his teeth in a hideous grin. "But only when somebody else eats it." Billy looked at what Lemke held on his lap and saw with a floating kind of déjà vu that it was a pie in a disposable aluminum pie plate. In his mind he heard his dream self telling his dream wife, "I don't want to be fat. I've decided I like being thin. You eat it." "You look scared," Lemke said. "It's too late to be scared, white man from town." He took a pocket knife from his jacket and opened it, pushed the blade into the crust and then drew it across, creating a slit about 3 inches long. He withdrew the blade. Red droplets fell from it onto the crust. The old man put the knife away. He hooked his misshapen thumbs over opposing sides of the pie plate and pulled gently. The slit gaped. showing a swimming, viscous fluid in which dark things, strawberries maybe, floated like clots. He relaxed his thumbs. The slit closed. So he continued to pull and release as he spoke. Billy was unable to look away.
So, you have convinced yourself that it is, what did you call it, a push? That what happened to my Susanna is no more your fault than my fault, or her fault, or God's fault. You tell yourself you can't be asked to pay for it. There is no blame, you say. There is no push. Everybody pays, even for things they didn't do.
Lemke fell reflectively silent for a moment. His thumbs tensed and relaxed, tensed and relaxed. The slit in the pie opened and closed.
Because you won't take blame, not you, not your friends. I make you take it. I stick it on you like a sign. For my dear dead daughter that you killed, I do this. For her mother and for her children. Then your friend comes. He poisons dogs, shoots guns in the night, uses his hands on a woman, threatens to throw acid. Take it off, he says. Take it off and take it off and take it off. And finally I say, okay, as long as he will get out of here. Not from what he did, but for what he will do. He is crazy, this friend of yours, and he will never stop.
Tense and relax. Tense and relax. Open and close.
Take it off, he says, and at least they don't say, make it disappear, make it not there anymore, because a curse is in some way like a baby.
His old dark thumbs pulled. The slit stretched open.
No one understands these things, not me either, but I know a little. Curse is your word, but Rom is better. Listen, purpur fargade ansiktet, you know that?
Billy shook his head slowly.
It means something like child of the night flowers. This way of saying is better because curse is the thing. What you have is not the thing. What you have is alive.
Yes, Billy said. It's inside, isn't it? It's inside, eating me.
Inside, outside,
Lemke shrugged.
Everywhere. This thing, purpur fargade ansiktet, you bring it into the world like a baby. Only it grows strong faster than a baby, and you can't kill it because you can't see it. Only you can see what it does.
The thumbs relaxed. The slit closed. A dark red rivulet trickled across the mild topography of the pie crust.
This curse, you still want to be rid of it?
Billy nodded. The old gypsy man with the rotting nose smiled. The black lines of rot under his left cheek dipped and wavered. The park was nearly empty now. The sun was nearing the horizon. The shadows covered them. Suddenly the knife was in Lemke's hand again, the blade out.
Unwrap your hand,
Lemke said. Billy looked down.
Yes, where she shot you.
Billy pulled the clamps out of the elastic bandage and slowly unwrapped it. Underneath, his hand looked too white, fish-like. In contrast, the edges of the wound were a dark, dark red, liverish color. Lemke handed Billy the knife.
If you want to be rid of the purpur fargade ansiktet, first you have to give it to the pie. Then you give the pie with the cursed child inside it to someone else. But that's to be soon, or it come back to you double. You understand?
Yes, Billy said.
Then do it if you will,
Lemke said. His thumbs tightened again. The darkish slit in the pie crust spread open. Billy hesitated, but only for a second. Then his daughter's face rose in his mind. For a moment he saw her with all the clarity of a good photograph, looking back at him over her shoulder, laughing. You're wrong about the push, old man, he thought. Heidi for Linda, my wife for my daughter. That's the push. He pressed the blade of Tadeusz Lemke's knife into the hole in his hand. The scab broke open easily. Blood spattered into the slit in the pie. He was dimly aware that Lemke was speaking very rapidly in Rom, his black eyes never leaving Billy's white, gaunt face. Billy turned the knife in the wound, watching as its puffy lips parted. Now the blood came faster. He felt no pain.
Enkelt! Enough!
Lemke plucked the knife from his hand. Billy suddenly felt as if he had no strength at all. He collapsed back against the park bench, feeling wretchedly nauseated, wretchedly empty. Then he looked down at his hand and saw that the bleeding had already stopped. No, that's impossible. He looked at the pie in Lemke's lap and saw something else that was impossible. The old man's thumbs relaxed. The slit closed again, and then there simply was no slit. The crust was unbroken except for 2 small steam vents in the exact center. He looked back at his hand and saw no blood, no scab, no open flesh. The wound there had now healed completely, leaving only a short white scar.
"This is yours, white man from town,"
Lemke said, and he put the pie in Billy's lap. The pie was loathsomely warm, and it seemed to pulse inside its cheap aluminum plate like something alive. Lemke stood up and looked down at him.
"You feel better?"
he asked. Billy realized he did. The weakness had passed. His heart was beating normally. "A little," he said cautiously. Lemke nodded.
"You take weight now, but in a week, maybe 2, you start to fall back. Only this time you fall back and there won't be no stopping it, unless you find someone to eat that."
"Yes." Lemke's eyes didn't waver.
"You sure?"
"Yes, yes," Billy cried.
"I feel little sorry for you,"
Lemke said.
"Not much, but a little. Once you might have been poco, strong. Now your shoulders are broken. Nothing is your fault. There are reasons. You have friends."
He smiled mirthlessly.
"Why not eat your own pie, white man from town? You die, but you die strong."
His glance shifted briefly to the pie, then back to Billy's face.
"Be careful who eats the meal that was meant for you,"
he said, and walked away. Halfway up the hill to the place where Ginelli had let him off, Billy saw the blue Nova parked at the curb, and by then he knew the curse really was gone. He was still horribly weak, and every now and then his heart skittered in his chest, but it was gone just the same. And now that it was, he knew exactly what Lemke had meant when he said a curse was a living thing, something like a blind, irrational child that had been inside him, feeding off him. Purpur fargade ansiktet. Gone now. But he could feel the pie he carried throbbing very slowly in his hands. And when he looked down at it, he could see the crust pulsing rhythmically. "It's sleeping," he thought, and shuddered. The Nova stood at the curb. The parking lights were on. "It's over," Billy said, opening the passenger door and getting in. That's when he saw Ginelli wasn't in the car, at least not very much of him. Because of the deepening shadows, he didn't see that he had come within an inch of sitting on Ginelli's severed hand until a moment later. It was a disembodied fist trailing red gobbets of flesh onto the Nova's faded seat cover from the ragged wrist. It lay on the passenger seat. Wide gold ring on the second finger, red stone, maybe a ruby. Fine black hair growing between the second and third knuckles. Ginelli's hand. Billy screamed and lurched away from it, and he realized that the pie was within an ace of falling to the Nova's floorboards. He righted it just in time and sat for a moment, sweating. He looked at the steering wheel and saw that the key was in the ignition. He supposed that the girl Gina might well have returned it when she delivered the hand. In his mind, he was absolutely certain that Ginelli was dead, and that it was she who had taken care of him. He got out of the Nova, set the pie carefully on the floor, crossed to the driver's side, and got in again. He opened the glove compartment. Inside was an old map of Maine. He unfolded it and put it over the hand. Then he started the car and drove down Union Street. He stopped at a McDonald's drive-in and bought 3 Big Macs. On his way out, he pulled up at the end of the building. He picked up the map with the hand inside it. He opened his window and deposited it in a trash barrel. Then he drove to Bar Harbor and turned in at the Bar Harbor Motor Inn. The no vacancy sign was on, and there was only one empty parking space. It was in front of an unlit unit, and Billy had little doubt that he was looking at the room Ginelli had stayed in as John Tree. Billy slid the Nova into the space. He got out, picked up the pie, crossed the forecourt, and headed into town. After 100 yards, he came to a bar called the Salty Dog. Outside were 3 cabs. Billy spoke to one of the drivers. For $15, the cabbie was delighted to drive him to Northeast Harbor. A half hour after that, the pie was on top of the TV in his Northeast Harbor motel room, and he was on the phone to Heidi. "Where are you?" Heidi's voice was angry, scared, tired. Billy was not particularly surprised to find out he felt nothing at all for that voice anymore, not even curiosity. "It doesn't matter," he said. "I'm coming home." He paused. "I want you to call Mike Houston, Heidi, and tell him you've changed your mind about the res gestae." "The what?" "The involuntary committal order," he said. "If I get grabbed by the cops when I get to Connecticut and end up in the Norwalk State Asylum, you're going to be a very sorry woman, Heidi." She was crying. "We only did what we thought was best for you, Billy. Someday you'll see that." "Just have that paper declared null and void," he said. "You sound as if you hate me," she said, and began crying again. "Don't be silly," he said, which was not precisely a denial. His voice was quieter now. "Where's Linda? Is she there?" "No, she's gone back to Rhoda's for a few days. She's very upset by all of this." "I bet," he thought. "Did she find out that you and good old Mike Houston were in the process of getting her father declared insane, Heidi? Is that what happened? But it didn't really matter. Linda was gone. That was the important thing." His eyes strayed to the pie. The crust still pulsed slowly up and down like a loathsome heart. It was dangerous. "It would be best for her to stay there until we have our problems worked out," he said. On the other end of the line, Heidi burst into loud sobs. Billy asked her what was wrong. "You're wrong. You sound so cold." "I'll warm up," he said. "Don't worry." "Billy, I want you to know that we can work all of this out. Really, we can. The most important thing is to get you well, and then we'll talk." "Sure, we'll talk," he said, and rang off. Mystery death may have been gangland slaying. A man found shot to death last evening in the cellar of a Union Street apartment building has been identified as a New York City gangland figure. Richard Ginelli, known as Richie the Hammer in underworld circles, has been indicted 3 times for extortion, trafficking, and sale of illegal drugs and murder by New York state and federal authorities. A source close to the Maine State Attorney General's office said last night that one of Ginelli's hands had been removed and the word pig had been written on the forehead in blood. Ginelli was apparently shot with a large-caliber weapon, but state police ballistics experts have so far declined to release their findings, which one official terms a bit unusual. This story was on the front page of the Bangor Daily News Billy Halleck had bought that morning. He had spent the previous day, the day after his conversation with Heidi, in Northeast Harbor, not so much resting as trying to recover a sense of sanity. He would feel it coming, and then he would look at the pie sitting atop the TV in its cheap aluminum plate, and it would slip. Near dusk he had put it in the trunk of his car, and that made it a little better. After dark, when that sense of sanity and his own deep loneliness both seemed strongest, he had called Rhoda Simonson in Westchester County. A moment or two later he had been talking to Linda. She had indeed found out about the res gestae. Mike Houston had told his wife. His wife had told their oldest daughter. Samantha Houston had just about broken both legs getting to Linda to tell her that her dear old mom was trying to get her dear old dad committed to a basket-weaving factory. "What did you say to her?" Billy asked. "I told her to stick an umbrella up her ass," Linda said, and Billy laughed until tears squirted out of his eyes. Linda had then gone directly home to ask Heidi if what Samantha Houston had said was true. "What happened?" Billy asked. "We had a really bad fight, and then afterward I said I wanted to go back to Aunt Rhoda's, and then she said, well, maybe that wasn't such a bad idea." Billy paused for a moment and then said, "I don't know if you need me to tell you this or not, Lynn, but I'm not crazy." "Oh, Daddy, I know that," she said, "and I'm getting better, putting on weight." "When are you going home?" she asked. And Billy, who expected to walk in his own front door not much later than 10 o'clock the next night, answered, It'll be a week or so, hon. I want to put on some more weight first." "Oh," Linda said, sounding deflated. "Okay." He told Linda he loved her and rang off. Sleep came easy, but the dreams were bad. In one of them he heard Ginelli in the trunk of his car, screaming to be let out. But when he opened the trunk, it wasn't Ginelli, but a bloody, naked boy-child with the ageless eyes of Tadeusz Lemke and a gold hoop in one earlobe. The boy-child held gore-stained hands out to Billy. It grinned, and its teeth were silver needles. Poor fargad ansiktet, it said in a whining, inhuman voice, and Billy had awakened, trembling in the cold grey Atlantic seacoast dawn. He checked out 20 minutes later and had headed south. He stopped at 7:15 for a huge country breakfast, and then could eat almost none of it when he opened the newspaper he had bought in the dispenser out front and read about Ginelli. He drove slowly, taking frequent breaks. The pie sat on the seat beside him, pulsing, warm. He spared it a glance from time to time. It no longer horrified him, as though in some instinctive fashion he had come to terms with it. As the shadows lengthened, he looked at his watch and realized that he would be home in less than an hour. He felt a strange, unpleasant emotion. He had gone 20 miles before he realized what it was. Excitement. He parked the rental car in the driveway behind his own Buick and started across the lawn. The front door, flanked by 2 graceful electric flambeaux, opened, and Heidi came out on the front stoop. She was wearing a red skirt and a sleeveless white blouse. She looked at him, face too white, eyes too dark, lips trembling. "Billy?" "I am," he said, and stopped where he was. They stood and looked at each other, Heidi with a species of wretched hope in her face, Billy with what felt like nothing at all in his. After a moment she burst out, "For Christ's sake, Billy, don't look at me that way. I can't bear it." He felt a smile surface on his face. Inside it felt like something dead floating to the top of a still lake. Heidi answered it with a tentative, trembling smile of her own. Tears began to spill down her cheeks. "Oh, but you always did cry easy, Heidi," he thought. "What's to eat?" he asked. "I'm starved." She made him a giant meal, steak, salad, a baked potato almost as big as a torpedo, fresh green beans, blueberries and cream for dessert. Billy ate all of it. Every movement, every gesture, and every look she gave him conveyed the same message. "Give me a second chance, Billy. Please give me a second chance." And little by little, as midnight approached, he sensed something else in her gestures and movements. Relief. She felt that she had been forgiven. That was very fine with Billy, because Heidi thinking she was forgiven was what it was all about. He told her about how he had chased the gypsies up the coast, about getting the photographs from Kirk Penchley of finally catching up to the gypsies in Bar Harbor. At that point, the Truth and Billy Halleck parted company. The confrontation hadn't gone at all as he had expected, he told Heidi. The old man had laughed at him. They had all laughed. "If I could have cursed you, you would be under the earth now," the old gypsy told him. "You think we are magic. All you white men from town think we are magic. If we were magic, would we be sleeping in fields? There is no magic show, white men from town. This is nothing but a traveling carny. Now get out of here before I put some of these young men on you. They know a curse. It's called the curse of the brass knuckles." He told Heidi that he had gone back to his motel room and simply stayed there for the next 2 days, too deeply depressed to do more than pick at his food. On the 3rd day, 3 days ago, he got onto the bathroom scales and saw that he had gained 3 pounds in spite of how little he had eaten. But when I thought it over, I saw that that was no stranger than eating everything on the table and finding out I'd lost 3 pounds, he said. And having that idea was what finally got me out of the mental rut I'd been in. I spent another day in that motel room doing some of the hardest thinking of my life. I started to realize they could have been right at the Glassman Clinic after all. I mean, even Michael Houston could have been at least partly right, as much as I disliked the little prick. "Billy," she touched his arm. "Anyway," he continued, "the problem was that Houston, those guys at the Glassman Clinic, even you, Heidi, were trying to ram it down my throat, trying to force-feed me the truth. I just had to think it out all for myself. Simple guilt reaction, plus, I suppose, a combination of paranoid delusions and willful self-deception. But in the end, Heidi, I straightened myself out. So I picked up the telephone and—" In the parlor, the clock on the mantel began banging musically. "It's midnight," he said. "Let's go to bed. I'll help you stack the dishes." "No, I can do it," she said, and then slipped her arms around him. I'm glad you came home, Billy. Go on upstairs. You must be exhausted. I'm okay, he said. I'll just... He suddenly snapped his fingers. Almost forgot, he said. I left something in the car. What is it? Can't it wait until morning? Yes, but I ought to bring it in, he smiled at her. It's for you. He went out, his heart thudding heavily in his chest. His hands were trembling so badly that he could not at first stick the key into the trunk slot. What if it's still pulsing up and down like that, his mind yammered. Christ almighty, she'll run screaming when she sees it. He opened the trunk. When he saw nothing inside, he almost screamed himself. Then he remembered. It was on the passenger side of the front seat. He slammed the trunk down and went around in a hurry. The pie was there, and the crust was perfectly still, as he had known, really, that it would be. Heidi was standing on the porch watching him. He crossed back to her and put the pie into her hands. His smile widened. Voila, he said. Wow. She bent down close to the pie and sniffed. Strawberry pie, my favorite. I know, Billy said, smiling. And still warm, thank you. I thought, if you came to the door with a rolling pin or something, I'd have a peace offering. Oh, Billy. She was starting to cry again. Billy, I'm so glad you're home, she wept. And you promise you don't hate me for what I did? You promise? I promise, he said gently, stroking her hair. She's right, he thought. It's still warm. Let's go inside, huh? In the kitchen, she put the pie on the counter and went back to the sink. Aren't you going to have a piece? Billy asked. Maybe when I finish these, she said. You have one if you like. After the dinner I put away, he asked, and laughed. You're going to need all the calories you can pack in for a while. This is just a case of no room in the inn, he said. Do you want me to dry those for you? I want you to go up and get into bed, she told him. I'll be right up behind you. All right. He went up without looking back, knowing she would be more likely to cut herself a slice of pie if he wasn't there. But she probably wouldn't, not tonight. Tonight she would want to go to bed with him, might even want to make love with him. But he thought he knew how to discourage that. He would just go to bed naked. When she saw him. And as far as the pie went... Fiddle-de-dee, said Scarlett. I'll eat my pie tomorrow. Tomorrow is another day. He laughed at the sound of his own dismal voice. He was in the bathroom by then, standing on the scales. He looked up into the mirror, and in it he saw Ginelli's eyes. The scales said he was now all the way up to 131 again, but he felt no happiness. He felt nothing at all, except tired. He was incredibly tired. He went down the hallway and into the bedroom. Slowly he began to undress. He lay in bed waiting for her to come up, and instead he heard noises which, although faint, were familiar enough to tell him a story. Squeak of an upper cupboard door, the one on the left, the one where they kept the dessert plates, opening. Rattle of a drawer, clink of kitchen implements. Sound of her footsteps crossing the kitchen again. He heard the board in the middle of the kitchen floor creak when she passed over it, as it had been doing for years. What will it do to her? Made me thin. Turned Carrie into something like an animal that, after he was dead, you'd make a pair of shoes out of it. Turned Hopley into a human pizza. What will it do to her? He realized he was floating away. Going to sleep? No, impossible. Impossible for anyone to fall asleep during the commission of a murder. Surely. His eyelids grew heavy. Irresistible waves of warmth, comfort, darkness, and his own exhaustion lapped around him. He sank into oblivion. He awoke with a start. Beside him, Heidi grunted in her sleep, turned over on her left side, and pulled the covers up over her head. Bright early morning sunshine fell through the windows. He looked across the room and saw by the digital clock on the dresser that it was 6:25. There were 6 red roses in a vase beside the clock. He got out of bed, crossed the room, pulled his robe off its hook, and went down to the bathroom. He turned on the shower and hung his robe up on the back of the door, noticing that Heidi had gotten a new robe, a pretty blue one. He stepped on the scales. He had gained another pound. He got into the shower and washed off with a thoroughness that was almost compulsive, soaping every part of his body, rinsing and then soaping again. He toweled himself off. He put on his robe and found himself standing by the closed door and looking fixedly at Heidi's new blue robe. He reached out one hand and caught a fold of nylon between his fingers. He rubbed its slickness. The robe looked new, but it also looked familiar. She's just gone and bought a robe that looks like one she owned sometime in the past, he thought. Human creativity only goes so far. In the end, we all start to repeat ourselves. In the end, we're all obsessives. Billy fingered the blue nylon, and a terrible idea began to slide into his mind. This robe, it didn't look familiar because Heidi had once owned one that looked like it. It looked familiar because Linda owned one that looked like it right now. He turned around and opened a drawer to the right of the sink. Here was a brush with Linda written along the red plastic handle. Black hairs clung to the bristles. Like a man in a dream, he walked down the hall to her room. Billy Halleck pushed open the door at the end of the hallway and saw his daughter Linda asleep in her bed, one arm across her face. Her old teddy bear, Amos, was in the crook of her other arm. No! Oh, no! 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 He hung on to the sides of the door, swaying back and forth. He saw everything. Her grey suede bomber jacket hung over the back of her chair. The one Samsonite suitcase open, spilling out a collection of jeans and shorts and underthings. He saw the Greyhound tag on the handle, and he saw more. He saw the roses beside the clock in his and Heidi's bedroom. The roses hadn't been there when he went to bed last night. No! Linda had brought the roses as a peace offering. She had come home early to make up with her mother before Billy came home. The old gypsy with the rotting nose. No blame, you say. You tell yourself and tell yourself and tell yourself, but there is no push, white man from town. Everybody pays, even for things they didn't do. No push. He turned then and ran for the stairs. No, not Linda, his mind screamed. Not Linda. God, please, not Linda.
Everybody pays, white man from town, even for things they didn't do, because that's what it's really all about.
What remained of the pie stood on the counter, neatly covered with saran wrap. Fully a quarter of it was gone. He looked at the kitchen table and saw Linda's purse there. He went to the sink. 2 plates, 2 forks. They sat here and ate pie and made up, he thought. When? Right after I went to sleep, must have been. He heard the old gypsy laughing, and his knees buckled. He had to clutch at the counter to keep from actually falling over. When he had some strength, he turned and crossed the kitchen, hearing the board in the middle squeak under his feet as he crossed over it. The pie was pulsing again, up and down, up and down. Its obscene, persistent warmth had fogged the saran wrap. He could hear a faint, squelching sound. He opened the overhead cupboard and got himself a dessert plate, opened the drawer beneath and got out a knife and fork. "Why not?" he whispered, and pulled the wrapping off the pie. Now it was still again. Now it was just a strawberry pie. And as Heidi herself had said, he still needed all the calories he could get. "Eat hearty," Billy Halleck whispered in the sunny silence of the kitchen, and cut himself a piece of gypsy pie.